during the boil, when it first starts foaming up, it'll boil, and a lot of this is because of proteins that are present that help stabilize the foam. They help create better foam on it. So these proteins act much like the proteins in an egg white. So as it's cooking, they get broken up and denatured, and then they fall apart. And when that happens, the foam falls apart too, and then it stops foaming in the kettle, and then you can leave it unattended for a while. Need a hotter stove. This takes forever.
I guess to make it larger batches, you just pretty well multiply everything out.
Yeah, almost everything you would just scale. The exception would be the hops. Bittering hops are more efficient in larger volumes. So if you take an ounce of hops and a gallon of water, boil it for an hour, it gives you so much bitterness. If you take 2 ounces and 2 gallons, it gives you even more than double what you got in the first one, because it's just more efficient in a larger volume. So in a brewery where you might have 1,000 gallons, then you use even less per gallon. So there's sort of a nice economy of scale with that. There are programs that will help calculate the difference. So if you're scaling a recipe, then you just use one of those, because it's kind of a pain to calculate. It's not linear. And then it's also affected by how much sugar's in it. So the sugar, the temperature, boiling duration, bitterness of the hops all play a role in how much extraction you get out of it, volume, if I didn't mention that. So there are programs that will calculate that for you real easily. And those help a lot. Some of those are free. You can find them online. There's one I like to use periodically called Beer Calculus. If you just search for Beer Calculus, you'll find it. It's free, it's real easy to use, and it calculates that seamlessly. And you can scale recipes in there. And then it has style guides to go by. If you're making pale ale, you say, all right, I'm making a pale ale. And then it'll put up style guides, and it'll tell you, based on what you've put in so far, well, it's too dark, or it's too light, or based on style. So you can design it to be in style or out of style. It is now boiling. And I don't know if any of you saw it, the foam was at the top already, just for that little amount of malt that was in it. So now, I'm going to add some of this extract. Usually try to dump this in quickly. The powder flows much like water, although with the steam coming out of the pot, it sticks to everything. So the faster you can pour it in, the better. I didn't do too badly today. Sometimes this whole thing will be just caked with the dust, so you have to like scrape it off to salvage it. Then if you want to come take a look at it, it sort of forms this raft on top that will take a minute to stir in. Yeah.
But you don't want to disturb it too much.
Oh, you can disturb it as much as you want. It's fine. With liquid extracts, this will not form a raft on top. It goes straight to the bottom. And then if you still have it heating, like I've left the heat on, it will go on to scorching. So I usually like to leave the heat on because I'm impatient. I don't want to admit it normally, but I did on film too, didn't I, rats? So I like the powders because they do form that sort of raft on top, and they give you time to stir it in, where the other ones don't. They tend to just scorch on the bottom. So as I'm stirring, I'm not just stirring it, but I am still scraping the bottom, because once the sugars are all dissolved, the ones against the bottom will tend to stick to it. And if you don't keep them off the bottom, then they will tend to caramelize darken it, and even I've had some burn even if you have if the heat's up this high. Once this comes to a boil again, I'll turn it down so it's reasonable. Well, at some point I'm probably going to have to turn it off and slide it to the side because it will, right now it's got about this much foam in it. So if you have a pot, this one's got calibrations on it. So it's below 12 quarts right now. So you can tell if it's being sneaky because it won't look like anything's happening. When you're stirring it, it's a little disturbed, but it will just start rising. It'll be almost unnoticeable. So if you notice it's above 12, then I'll turn it down. And it really only needs to boil about 10 minutes or so to break those proteins so that it stops foaming. Another good tip is when it first comes to a boil, a lot of the directions will tell you when it comes to a boil, add your bittering hop addition. And that's okay to do that, although one of the things that happens because of these proteins, any of you that don't remember high school chemistry, which I had to relearn for doing a lot of this, proteins are long strands of things. I don't remember their names, amino acids and stuff. And as they're sitting there at a certain temperature, they have a certain shape to them just because of their chemical construction. As the temperature changes, their shape changes. So initially they will sort of expand and straighten out, and then as the heat keeps rising, they will curl in and then they grab all their neighbors. So that's why an egg white suddenly gets more solid because all the proteins grab all their neighbor proteins. If you keep heating it, they grab them and they sort of break in place where they don't let go of them. And once they get denatured in that position, they're permanently, the egg whites turn white because they don't even let light through at that point, and then they're solid. If you keep heating them, then they really break and make a mess. All right, you can see you can't see this, but it's up to here and rising. All right, we're turning this down. All right, it's up to here now. And it just looks all foamy, like meringue almost. So my point with the whole protein thing is it's best to wait until the foam collapses and dissipates. It doesn't have to dissipate fully because when you add the hops, those proteins will grab some of the hop flavors and bitterness, and then they catch them. And then you'll see later, if I remember to show you, there will be flecks of protein in there, much like egg drop soup. You put a bunch of eggs in, you see these flakes of stuff. It's all from the egg. That will be all containing the flavors, and then when they settle out and get separated, they're lost to the beer. So you remove some of the bitterness that you intended to be in the recipe. So by just waiting until the foam collapses, then your beer will be more like designed. Well, it's starting to behave now. That'll just take a minute. Initially, it's also nice to get a vigorous boil going because you want it to not only take out some of those proteins, which later will cause hazing in your beer. Some beers that are hazy might not have been boiled properly. Another good benefit is there are other compounds in the beer that will add flavor later that are undesirable. One class of them is a precursor to this chemical called dimethyl sulfide, which has sort of a roasty corn flavor, which is not bad if you're having roasted corn, but it's not really a good flavor in beer. So that is there's a chemical that gets turned into that by the yeast. So the nice thing about it is it's volatile. So during the boil, if you get a vigorous boil going, it boils off. It comes out. It's like a bad aroma, so to speak. And then if you get rid of that, then later the yeast, it's not present for the yeast to convert it into the dimethyl sulfide form and lend that flavor to beer. So usually you want it boiled vigorously at least a little while. Then you could turn it down to something more reasonable.